Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me. This is the morning market review. It's Wednesday, the 24th of May, 2023. My name is Russell Shaw. I'm a senior market specialist at FXCM, and my email address rshaw@fxcm.com. Just going to go ahead and bring up our high risk investment warning. I'll keep this on screen for a few moments. All right, let's bring up our commentaries disclaimer. And just our references, MarketScope 2.0 and TradingView.com. Let's bring up the first chart, which is the NASDAQ. And what we've been talking about is this overbought condition. And I think that we've just got to be very careful here that we don't want to get caught in some sort of trap where the oscillator is actually starting to normalize. I think the fact of the matter is we are in a high risk environment. The risk return profile is skewed now because there's a risk that the RSI needs to normalize. This is on the weekly chart. Something that I did yesterday, which I want to share with you, is I want to take a look at what's called the VXN. VXN. It's like the VIX, but it's calculated from options on the NASDAQ. The VIX is calculated on options on the S&P 500. So it's a volatility or a fear measure, but of the technology sector. And what we have here is the VXN at the top. I've got an RSI of the VXN, and then we've got the NASDAQ underneath. In terms of using the VXN, my preferred way is using it as a contrarian indicator. In other words, when everything seems to be really perfect and no real sort of signs of trouble or headwinds, that's kind of when I think the VXN or the VIX really comes into its own. And what you can see here is when the VXN moves oversold, okay, there tends to be a pullback in the NASDAQ's bottom chart's the NASDAQ. And the next one over here, okay, so we go back to November, goes oversold, and then there's a pullback. This one over here, there's a delay. So in terms of the timing, it's not always something that is timed sort of efficiently. There's a bit of a lag here, but then we get a few weeks of sideways to slightly down movement. Now, take a look at this area here. Okay. This area here, let's change the color of that. Make it green. Okay, so you've got the VXN moving into an oversold. In other words, there is a sense of complacency around the NASDAQ. So that sense of complacency, well, combine that with the fact that we've got an overbought RSI, and I think that there is a case to be made for some sort of corrective movement here. If we go through to the daily chart, it looks as if the correction's actually started. It moved overbought, and now starting to show those signs of reversal. And we've spoken about it, and we're just building this case for the fact that the rally in the stock market has really been accompanied by, in my opinion, bad news. In other words, there's been talk about the fact that there is no breadth with regards to the movement. Breadth means that only a few companies are pulling the stock market up, most aren't. I don't think breadth is a necessary component of a bull market. In fact, when I did take a look at the breadth indicator, it's actually biased to the downside. but that was many, many years ago. So it's not sort of an indicator I spend too much energy on. But the idea here is, whilst the NASDAQ and the market's been moving up, there's been a wall of worry. Now, there seems to be a shift into sort of good news, just at the time when the risk profile has started to skew. And I think that we've got to be a little bit savvy here and understand, well, the pullback here is a probability. Now, I don't think necessarily a trend change, but some sort of pullback, and pullbacks, I think, are opportunities. So if I just bring up Microsoft Paint here, and we've seen this many times, but prices don't move in straight lines. They tend to zig and zag. And let's change this to green. Here's your impulse move up. Here's your impulse move up. Okay. Let's change this to red. Here's your corrective move down. Here's your corrective move down. And it's kind of the corrective moves where you can see if you can get into the dip in a primary uptrend. So if we go back to the NASDAQ here, yeah, we've got a primary uptrend. We've got a shift up in that momentum. Any sort of pullback here towards this trend line, I think potentially offers us the opportunity to make some money, right? So this is very, very interesting. There is a complexity which we mentioned yesterday. The complexity is that interest rates are starting to move higher. Still got to do some work on this, but if we just go through to the US 2-year yield, let's get rid of this. And let's get rid of this. The 2-year yield here is, to me, something that is worrying. The reason that it's worrying is because the NASDAQ is very sensitive to interest rate movements. And if we carry on moving in this northeasterly direction, well, that's going to be a headwind, particularly for growth indexes like the NASDAQ. The real big news item that's going to be in focus this week is coming on Friday. It's the core PCE. So the core PCE, if that comes in lower than expected, then I think that would be good for risk markets. If it comes in hotter than expected, that's going to be bad for risk markets, because if it's hotter than expected, there's going to be a focus on interest rates again. So NASDAQ over here looking at, I think, some sort of corrective action, but in that corrective action, I'd like to see if there is opportunity. Now, the other instrument that we've been looking at is the US dollar, because the US dollar is actually been on a tear. So what's happened is, as the interest rates been moving up, so it's been here March, April into May, moving up. So what you have here is the US dollar showing support from April into May, and that, I'm just waiting for the I'm just waiting for my system to stop hanging. If it carries on hanging, we'll just, there we go. We'll do it on TradingView. All right. So we've got this higher trough that's coming on the dollar, and I just want to watch this to see if we get the higher peak. I again would be nervous about getting a higher peak on the US dollar, because it's a safety haven, the US dollar. It's a risk off. It's a risk off instrument. It tends to do well when there is fear in the market. So the fact that we've seen that the VXN showing signs of complacency, the fact that the NASDAQ is overbought, well, I think the US dollar comes into focus as a potential, I would suggest, Possibly a shorter term play because I just want to see how those interest rate moves pan out. But I'd be very interested to see if we get the higher peak in here. We go through to the daily time frame. We're nicely in zone 1, and if we go through to the hourly, take a look what's happening here. Okay, so for today, it looks as if we are getting some strength in the US dollar this morning. There's a comment here. Let me just see what the comment's saying. Aha, okay. Gurdeep just referring to the inflation print that came out of the UK. Yes, so the inflation came down. Last time it was at 10.1. I believe they were expecting 8.2, came in at 8.7 on a headline basis, but the core came in hotter than expected. I think there is case for another interest rate movement there, Gurdeep. I'm going to do an article. If Nick hasn't done one yet, I'm going to do one on the inflation, and I'll put that onto Telegram. Take a look at this. Take a look at this candlestick here. This is an interesting candlestick. This is the US dollar hourly. It got sold down over the last 53 minutes, but okay, at the low, bears have lost control. Who's in control here? Bulls. Looks like we're going to get a cross here, what's commonly referred to as a golden cross. And you can see that the stochastic starting to cross positively as well. And the fact of the matter is, we want to just see if we can get the stochastic up until 80 and push. What would be interesting, let's just see how pound is moving, because his dollar strength is pound moving up or down with regards to its inflation. So let's just bring okay, so you can see that there was a very big steep movement when the inflation print hit. It's been faded to a certain degree. This R1 on the pound is looking as if it is a certain resistance. And if you take a look at the daily chart here, daily chart actually puts pound in zone 3. I think that the dollar is still very much in the driving seat of what's happening in the majors. The fact that the pound has shot up and it's got this big selling tail here, I would look at R1 as a potential resistance area, and I would want to see if we're going to get a dead crossover here, and if we get a bearish cross here on the stochastic, and if the stochastic then starts making its way down. So this could be some sort of rally in a sort of perverse way. When I say perverse, I mean because the inflation reading is hot, but it doesn't seem that the inflation reading is actually the driver of the market here, Gurdy, but it actually seems as if the greenback's the driver of the market here. And I just wonder if we get a reaction off of this R1, and it seems that cable, okay, sitting nicely in zone 3. Okay, I think I said zone 1 earlier. It's zone 3, the lower blue, lower red. You've got the RSI sitting below 50 as well. Let's take a look at 2 more, and then we will conclude, and we'll cross over to the crypto minute. But before we cross over, let's just take a look at the euro. And remember how we started this analysis. We started this analysis looking at the US dollar. The US dollar looked as if it was starting to show strength at the beginning of trade. Well, look at the euro. It's in zone 3. Okay. There is a strong bearish RSI at below 50. Some blue on the daily chart. Maybe that is a bounce in the downtrend that we can exploit. Let's just go through to the hourly and take a look at that. All right, let's take this out. Let's take this out. And you can see that the central pivot here is acting as the resistance. 1, 2, 2, 3. And the question is, do we move into the next 1, 2 over here? If I bring up Microsoft Paint, 1, 2, 2, 3, and then the potential movement down, right? 1, 2, 2, 3, and so how do we monitor if we're getting some sort of impulse to the downside? Well, there has to be signals. There has to be a crossover. Okay, that's trigger 1. So crossover of the trend following EMAs. There'll have to be a crossover of the momentum-based stochastic. Even if we get those, there's no guarantee here. Okay, it could whipsaw. So we take a look to see if the momentum gets the oscillator, the stochastic oscillator, down to 20 and holds. If we get down to 20 and holds, then potentially we get some sort of movement and some sort of swing that we can use to our advantage. But it's a dual analysis. It all started with the US dollar. All started with the US dollar. This is a strong looking candle on the US dollar to start the day. All right, let's take a look at one more. We'll just go through to the DAX. Okay, so I think that this is behaving as expected. Now, why do I say that? Is because yes, there is an uptrend, and this is a primary uptrend. I think the primary uptrend is the key here, but we were tending towards overbought. Now, we weren't quite overbought, but I think that the risk influence from the NASDAQ, which has really been one of the tech has been really leading markets, is influencing risk. So it's no surprise to see that we're getting a push down. And yesterday, we could just see the crossover here. Okay, so it looked as if we were getting a crossover up, but then the risk turned risk off, and it's moved down. I'd just be very careful here. It's moved into the neutral area. It's moved into no man's land. Let's just keep an eye on S1. Is there any support that's going to come through on the S1 level? And keep an eye on the crosses. Okay, this is a very dangerous looking stochastic. The longer the stochastic stays in the lower quintile, the greater the pressure to the downside. So this is a very ominous looking stochastic. It's not suggesting weak momentum. It's actually suggesting strong momentum, to the downside. Okay, I'm going to stop there. If there's any questions, please go ahead and type those in. We're going to cross over in a few moments. It's just gone top of the hour now, so we'll cross over now to the crypto minute. We'll just take a look at some of the crypto movements. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. It's been wonderful speaking with you. I really appreciate your logging in. Have a good day, a good evening ahead. We shall speak again tomorrow morning. Thanks very much, guys.